Many writers do fall into. What I hope to do is to share a little bit about what my perspective is on this issue as a writer. What connects us all as writers, as human beings, is the very same thing that makes us good readers and good writers. So the craft fair is basically to take, the trick here is to look at it at one aspect of writing, which is using imagery and how images can be a trigger for both the subconscious process of coming up with stories and seeing how that expresses itself in writing. Now, I know it's a Friday night, so what I did was parts of this session were designed to be interactive. So I'll be leading us through a couple of things, and I think it'd be great if you could jump in and participate. It makes the whole session livelier, and I think you'll get something out of it too. So let's begin. So the standard problem, right? This is you. What keeps you from actually doing the story or finishing the story? These are some of the list of common complaints. Oh, it's been done before. Oh, why am I doing the same story that 100 other people have written before? What's original? If it's not original, why write it? That's one. And then the second thing is related, which is that, well, I'm telling the story somebody else has told before, and I feel daunted because the other person has told that story better. And I feel the need to be better than that version. Otherwise, again, why write it? And then the third thing is, sometimes they're daunted by the thought of, well, there's nothing interesting in my life, in my world, here that's worth reading or writing about. In fact, there used to be a strain of, a bunch of people used to say that Singapore is so boring, there's nothing to write about, which is quite funny when you think about it, because there's so much going on in Singapore, right? But it is a perception that some people have. And not just about Singapore, it could be wherever you come from. You may come from a small town in the United Kingdom, you think your life is boring. But the reality is, if you look around you, there are things that are worth talking about. This is another complaint, the fourth one. My stories don't interest others and they don't interest me. And so people lose their decision to continue because they don't find a connection at all. And sometimes this is about losing sight of why you wrote the story in the first place. What was the genesis, the idea behind it? And then of course the proverbial, nothing's coming to my mind. That's where I'm running out of ideas. I really can't think of what I'm going to do. And so these are the common problems that we see. And it's something that writers deal with, right? The proverbial writer's block. Right? So what I thought was, okay, if you reduce the question to one simple question, why won't my subconscious cooperate? I'm staring at the blank piece of paper. I'm willing myself to come up with a story. Nothing's coming, right? And you hit the back of your head, please, wake up, Well, the usual antidote for this is to say, well, if I can't get my subconscious to cooperate, let's change the subject. Let's look at something else, right? So what I want to do is take the first exercise, okay? And this is basically the first question, which is, you see an image, you give me 3 words that come to mind. Can we do that?
Sour.
Sour, thank you. Another one?
Fresh.
Fresh. One more.
Delicious.
Delicious. Okay, sour, delicious, fresh. And this, oh sorry, it's running at it's a mind of its own. Okay, it has to be no nouns. Okay, no nouns. Cute. Very good. Anything else?
Smelly. Furry.
Smelly.
Furry.
Furry. Very good. This one?
Funny.
Funny.
Cute. Cute.
Cute. Anybody?
Sad.
Sad. Okay. Oops, sorry. Hope you all had dinner.
Yummy.
What?
Hungry.
Hungry. Okay.
Food.
Food. Well,
No, that's
can be a
not.
noun, yeah. Anything?
Yummy, someone said. Yeah. Someone said yummy.
Yummy, yeah. Any other thought? Any other words? Come to mind?
Posh.
Posh. Posh. Very good. This one. Happy. Anything else?
Innocence.
Innocence.
No,
That's a noun.
innocent.
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 Anything?
Curious.
Curious. Sorry. when I designed this, it shouldn't be running by itself. This one?
Spectacular.
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 Spectacular. What else?
Hey, it's running.
Brooding.
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 Brooding. Anything else?
Scary.
Scary. Okay. This one? Sometimes don't think about it. Process it and just give me the first word that comes to mind. Sorry.
Can't think. Funny.
Funny.
Gossiping.
Gossiping. Gossipy. Yeah. Anything else?
Curious.
Curious. This one? What? No, that's fine.
That's such a
Woody.
word. Squiggly.
Squiggly.
Many roots rooty.
Routine. Okay. This one?
Daring.
Courage.
Courage.
Oh, that's a noun.
That's a noun. Daring.
Courageous.
Courageous. Daring. Okay, so let's review. Yeah? Basically 9 images. And there's a range of words you would use. There are some which are very close to the actual thing about. Sorry, what's that about? There are some words that came up, which was interesting because you have one which was the obvious tactile reference, so furry. One was the way they make you feel, funny. And then there were some which were of a different bent. Some, like the storm cloud, right? There was brooding, the word came up. With children, it was innocence. For the dog and the beggar,
Sad.
there was sad, there was happy at the same time, right? Now, what's the point of this exercise, right? Well, it's basically whenever you do a word association and you're forced to trigger response and just say what it is that you're reacting to, it's important to think about why you reacted the way you have reacted. And I set a few things out here to say, well, firstly, the way you react is a mixture of who you are and what you bring with you. If you're in a happy mood and you look at the same image, you will find yourself pulling the right light image, a light word to describe it. If you were, I dare say that if you were depressed, and you looked at the image of the beggar with the dog, you would walk away with a very different word jumps to your mind, right? So clearly what's driving you inside drives your perception and how you express yourself. The other point is that when you look at any one image, what part of the image you focus on is a decision that you make. Sometimes it's a decision that's subconscious. So the giraffe, one said furry, the other said happy, funny, right? And again, it's what you pick up. When I was looking, it's possible that the person looking at the giraffe and thinking furry was looking at the fur that came at the bottom of the chin. The person who was saying was funny was because of the look on his lip.
Smelly.
Smelly? Smelly could also be your imagination saying, well, if I were here, what would I see? That's sense. And the important mechanism here is this, that you all took a bit of time to respond, right? What does that mean? Your mind is actually processing this now and saying, I'm suggesting a number of things that are coming to me now. But before I tell you my answer, there's a part of me that has to censor what I'm saying. Right? A part of me, it may be that right away, I don't know how many of you felt this, but right away when you looked at the image, maybe there wasn't a word that jumped right to mind, but you may not have expressed it because your mind, your conscious mind says, hold on, let me try another word. So the conscious mind expresses, but there's also a censorship function, right? The conscious mind says, that's a great idea, please go back, don't come out, you know? So that is one mechanism as to what's happening. And what that means is that there's something internal going on, but it results in external expression. So you carry a story inside you, you carry a prejudice inside you, you carry a way of looking at things inside you. But there's always the task of expressing that. So this is more of a subconscious process. Why do you feel the way you do? I don't quite know. But then I try to express it to to communicate to another person about this process. So the key thing is that our subconscious, there's a thought that essentially, if you look at the mind today, the theory is that if you consider the circle the conscious life, there is a theory that says that this line, everything below this line is your subconscious, everything above it is your conscious life. The idea is that there's a lot more, it's the iceberg thing, there's a lot more under the line, a lot more going on in your subconscious than your conscious. And this is the part that has the task of writing. This is the part that has the task of telling people, communicating. Why? Because we communicate as social animals. We have developed a larger aspect of this portion of our mind, right? So when you write something, this has the job of applying the skills you learned about expressing yourself, language skills, anything you might have read as well. But every time you read or write something, the process bubbles up from here. So if you're generating an idea, it goes this way. If you're receiving, if you're reading, it comes this way. So there's this interplay. Now, people who can't write and they're stopped, they basically come to this point where the mind says, no, I cannot produce this image. And they may have many impulses, but they cannot control it, or they choose to desensitize. They don't ask themselves, they don't listen to themselves clearly. Now, there's a medical reason why this is the case. Psychologists say that as human beings, there was evolution. If you buy the idea that there's evolution, the idea is that we all started off as base animals with a limited subconscious, but civilization has pushed this line lower and lower. So the conscious mind is a fairly recent development, and it's still fragile. So they trace some medical history, problems with psychological diseases to the fact that this is still a developing aspect. But I mean, that doesn't interest us for this purpose, but it's to remember that basically when you're talking about writing, those two elements of your mind are interacting in one time. And here's a series of images that I want to share with you. Have you seen this before? No? This is these are pictures taken from a book on alchemy. You know, alchemists are precursors of chemists. Back in the old days, people said I could create gold by combining a number of things. So one of the beliefs was that if you put the right combination of heat, of gases, and you apply the right processes, you come up with a magical element called the philosopher's stone, make you live forever. You know? Now, alchemy was, in that sense, a very crude, driven by superstition and folklore, and not a very scientific way of examining the world. But it was interesting because what did they think they were doing? They were actually expressing a process of destruction and rebirth. This idea that I'm going to start with a certain material, I will destroy it, that material will die. I will refine it in the crucible of something, in the fire. It gets rebirth, it gets distilled, and becomes a real, a purified process. And the end result is a new material that combines maybe two elements together, and it's a hybrid. What has this got to do with writing, right? What has this got to do with writing? Well, you can actually take this process and tell yourself, writing is similar. Because what happens here? If you draw a parallel, you'll say, I've got all these ideas, I've got my experiences, and I'm breaking it down. I'm destroying it. Every time I take a narrative, I learn about something, I want to retell it, I'm actually destroying the truth behind it. No story can ever faithfully capture 100% of what happens. Right? So the moment you document it, the moment you write it down, it almost becomes a lie, because it's one person's perspective, and it will never be the full truth. So there's already the death of something, the death of a truth. Okay? The elements of the story are then working in your subconscious. You are building into it perhaps a part of yourself. You know, how we talked about, if you were unhappy, you would project that into the story or to the image that you saw. If you were happy, this would be a vibe you would insert to the image. Well, that's what's happening now. You are then starting to create a process by which what emerges from the original idea becomes something completely new. And it's born as a separate new idea, and this is the story that emerges. So as a process, it just flows. So in a sense, the reason why this is a useful tool is because very few people can really intuitively understand what's going on. They can understand the concept, generally the phasing, but there is so much imagery loaded into the way it's expressed. And what it tells us is that you will never really comprehend fully how your mind goes, but is developing a story as it works, as you work through it. But trust in its process. Believe in the mythology of the fact that you can create stories. Now, the psychologists go back a little bit more, and I talked a bit about the growth of the subconscious. But they're saying it's not just a biological thing, it's a cultural thing. What does that mean? Well, think about Singaporean stories. Or Singaporean literature, how many pieces of Merlion poems and Merlion stories have you read? Right? Plenty. There are plenty of writers who have written about it. It's become a meme. It's become a part of our society. It's a Singaporean idea. If you think about it, it's very strange because it was an STBB creation, right? The Singapore Reverse Promotion Board. They created it, they want to generate interest in Singapore. But the funny thing is that our artists have taken it and they have transformed it until it has now become not just a branding symbol, it's become a cultural symbol. So in other words, just like the alchemical process, we took the raw material of a civil servant's dream of how to brand the country, and we have put it through our own our collective imaginative process. And the works that have resulted have created a new symbol, a new element. And that's enriched the culture of Singapore. That's made a beautiful story or image that we can hold our national identity to. Okay? So, if you think about it, there are a number of these things that have developed. Some writers think, or some psychologists think that these are concepts or stories, that have come as a result of this process. Over time, different cultures have their own appreciation of deity or God. Some of them think of the stories in terms of growing up. So when you grow up, everyone grows up, and they share the same experience, so they create a series of stories where you could say it's about coming of age, and they express it in the form of a quest. Sometimes it's about the same recurring character over and over again. I don't know how many times I don't know if you follow movies, but I remember watching Harry Potter. And there's this scene in Harry Potter where Voldemort, the bad guy, he sprays this lightning at a character and it shoots out. And I was thinking to myself, actually this looks a lot like the Emperor in Star Wars 20, 30 years ago, where he sprays his hands out and there's also magical lightning that flashes out. And you wonder yourself, why do I see the same image repeated itself, right? Well, it's because we do share all these common roots. It's coming from partly because we're learning from the world and we're processing it the way that we do. It's a common experience. So the image is no surprise that the images are also common. Right? Now, you know that conundrum, how can I write a story that's original if everybody has written this story before? For this one, I just want to give you a sense of, well, let's think about what original means. In law, original doesn't mean never been done before. Original means it originates from you. Okay? In other words, if I want to claim legal ownership of a particular concept for copyright purposes, I just need to show that I didn't copy from someone else, it came from me. I think that concept is very real in writing as well. Because every story you put out, every story that you read, came from someone. And it came from him in a way that is unique. It's almost the alchemical process. People understand everything differently. So what expresses in the story is the one unique way that that story has emerged. It's gone through you and it becomes a unique story. And so every story, even if you borrow even if you share common roots, the story you reproduce will still be uniquely yours. And it can only have come from you. Okay? Now, apart from, we do see that, of course, that every tree is unique, but every tree has branches, every tree has leaves. So there are elements that are also common. And this is what allows us as readers to appreciate it. If I'm the only person who speaks the one language and nobody else can understand my language, nobody will ever understand what I'm trying to say. Right? But because you and I are both humans, we both grew up, we all went through life together, we know what it means to be happy, sad, to lose a friend, to lose family members, to gain a friend, fall in love, whatever. Right? We have a common basis for experience. And this is the way that the roots are connected. Every tree has its own roots, but there is a connection beneath. So let's do another exercise. I would like you to look at these images now and tell me what you think is different. Can you describe it?
This is like glamour, you know, it's like the nightlife. And this is more dread. It's like just way in the afternoon.
Right. More dread. More? What was the word used?
Dread. D-R-A-B. Drab.
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 Great. Drab. Excellent. Anybody else have a view? Anyone?
If I'm a foreigner thinking of coming here to work, that's exciting. This is.
Okay. Anything else? Yes.
Life and death.
Life and death. I'm assuming this is life and not death.
Because it's the bustling city life and then it's like completely dead there.
Great. Anyone else? Okay, that means that's 3. That's very good. Let's do another one. This one. It's the same image. It's the same thing. What's different?
This cloud here.
So what would you say separates this from this?
It's very stark.
Stark, right?
Yes.
This is softer.
Stark and soft.
This is almost like hallucination. This is like dream. You know, it's not funny. It doesn't look like a real thing. It looks like a negative.
Negative? Yeah.
So this part is a very peaceful, real, less dream-like.
One more. Thank you. One more.
Say imposing,
Imposing.
inviting.
Inviting. Okay. Another one. There are 3. So you need to explain the differences between that would, in a way that would explain all 3 in one go. So you're not comparing one against the other, you're comparing all 3. This is actually the same image. This is not. Any words?
Second picture actually portrays the person more than the background. The second picture, the middle one.
More personal.
Personal. Personal. Personal versus impersonal. What else? Anyone else? Well, care to try? Yes.
Importance.
Importance. Versus?
As in like, the first picture is like, everything is equally important. The second picture is like, only one thing is important. Then the third picture is like that thing is important, but so is the big picture.
Interesting. That's an interesting way to look at it. Thank you.
It's a matter of significance.
Significance.
Which is like most.
Okay. Okay. How do you describe the difference here?
Confusion versus piety.
Confusion and piety. Excellent. That's very rich.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Far away.
So, what is that? The first one?
Yeah, we can't see what
A lot of shoes.
A lot of
Shoes,
A
eh?
lot of shoes.
These are all shoes.
All shoes.
These are all shoes.
Chaos and order. It's
Chaos and order.
Yes, and
chaotic.
Shoes. I can't see the shoes.
But you can't see the shoes.
This is what shoes cost.
There's a mess, no sandals, lace,
All in
shoes.
one garnish.
All kinds.
So one in Singapore, the other one is.
This is Singapore.
Syria.
Syria, yeah.
Syria of all time.
Okay. Very good. You know, I love food, right?
Chicken, yeah, chicken.
Curry chicken.
Wow. Chicken.
What's the difference? Some hum.
Okay, actually, I just feel this interview, you guys can really Okay, so what was that about, right? Okay, again, just now we had the one exercise where we said, what is your instinctive reaction to the one image? This one is slightly different. This one is about how do you perceive patterns? Because now it's not so much, you've done one level up now, you're now assembling pieces together. And it's interesting because, look at, okay, just take this example of confusion and piety, chaos and order. There's one stream going through here, a concept of opposites. This isn't quite an opposite. Confusion and piety. There's something going on here that's different from a pure logical reference. Yeah? The gentleman who said importance, and the gradation of importance, and the focus of words. Again, it is a logical response, but it's interesting that he sees the concept of importance. Right? It wasn't just, you could use a technical term to describe context, focus, you know, but it was also a response. So, again, your instincts and your intuition is responding and driving it. But notice how, in the concept of relationships, of one image to another, part A, part B, how are they connected? What happens there? What's happening there now is you are, okay, it's a little bit of a prejudice. To say it's prejudicing, you're prejudicing the image, right? And when you ask yourself, why can two story writers tell the same scene, but it reads so differently, right? How can I come away and laugh at this scene? The other writer made me cry, right? It's because now we're starting to insert a narrative. We're starting to put in our own connections. And the reader senses it. It isn't just the root of the image and the words you choose. It's the assembly that matters. Right? And every person can assemble the same parts of the story in a way that is still unique. So we moved up one level now. We're talking about relationships. Then this is where it's a good time to talk about some general ideas, which is relationships. At some level, the connectors, the things that connect one image to another, the patterns, you'll see time and time again. There's recurring patterns, archetypes of characters or figures that keep coming back again and again, and the recurring themes and the recurring stories. This is what unites us, but notice how at its base, again, it's individual, right? There's one vision that's expressed by one person, confusion and piety, chaos and order, right? But at the same time, someone else in another part of the world may have come up on a similar touchstone, right? So at the heart of all our uniqueness, the paradox is we may be unique, but we are also united. This is a recurring theme that I touch on now. I just want to make very clear at the outset, because I've given this presentation before and I've been misunderstood. But I want to make at the outset that I am religious, okay, and I do have certain fundamental beliefs. But I'm presenting this theory for the purposes of the lecture. So last time I presented it, some other religious person in the crowd was upset that I made do all these connections. So I'm just letting you know now that this is only for the purposes of the lecture, okay? This is the story of Noah's Ark, right? Many of us will know this story. But the interesting thing is the concept that there's actually, at the heart of many cultures, a very similar story. And you'd be amazed at the touch points which are similar. So we know that the key elements of the Noah story is that there's a chosen survivor, Noah. There was a vessel that weathered the storm, the ark. There was a mission, a call for him to save life. There was a world-devouring storm, the flood. There was the fact that the ship actually comes to rest, probably on a mountain usually, right? And then there's a giving thanks to deity and the repopulation of the earth because it was a water-destroying flood. These are the key concepts. What we know is that there are different cultures that actually have the same concept. Okay? So in the Judeo-Christian version of the story, the character is Noah. In the Sumerian version, his name is Pishin. In the Hindu version, it's Manu. And in the Greek version, a man called Deucalion. First touch point, which is similar. There was the ark, right? In the Sumerian version, it is an ark, just like the Judeo-Christian version. In fact, the similarities don't stop there. There's even dimensions which are very similar. In the Hindu version, there's Manu's fish-toed boat. A fish pulls the boat through this particular boat. The other one is Deucalion's box. The Greeks weren't so ambitious. They just said, I'll put the guy in the box, right? This is another one. So the intervention by the gods, sorry. So Noah is called by God to go build the ark. Prometheus warns Deucalion of the flood. Vishnu warns Manu of the flood as well. Divine intervention. Then there is the flood, which is the signature event. All these stories have the same element of the flood. Okay? This bas relief you see here is literally the bits. You can see the ship still in the waters. Okay. This image I saw it in the Louvre many years ago when I was a teenager. It's always stayed with me. It's quite a wonderful piece of art. But that's the signature story. Okay? And then the fact that it came to rest on a mountain. Surprisingly, we have mountains. The Judeo-Christian version, Mount Ararat. Interestingly, that's the same mountain the Sumerians chose, right? Babylonians chose. The Sumerians said Mount Nisur, Greek Mount Parnassus, and then the Malaya Mountains apparently, in the Hindu version. And then you'd be surprised, even the rainbow has its similarities. Okay? But only two strands have it. The Sumerians, and it's interesting here because you've got the explanation. In the Sumerian version, Pishin comes out, and see the reason why the flood stops in the Sumerian version is the gods missed the sacrifices by human beings. Because they kill all the human beings, nobody's around to kill calves and burn offerings. And they missed it. So they said, okay, I will bring the flood down. And Pishin comes out and he sacrifices a lamb or something. And the gods smell it, they think it's so sweet. The goddess Ishtar takes off her necklace and she throws it into the sky in celebration. And the rainbow is therefore created. In the Judeo-Christian version, God relents. He has done his punishment. He allows Noah to rest and on the mountain. And Noah gives thanksgiving, right, to God. And so God then creates the rainbow as a covenant, a promise to man that he will not destroy the earth in that way. And there's no rainbow in the Hindu or Greek version, so it's not always complete. But what's the significant difference here? Just like what we did here, where we developed a different relationship. There is something going on in the Sumerian story that's different from what's going on in the Judeo-Christian story. The Sumerian version of the story is about understanding the cosmology of the world. Why is there a rainbow in the sky? Well, there's a promise that we will still survive, even though there is a flood. Judeo-Christian vision is different. It's articulating a relationship between man and God. So this is a fundamental step in that journey. And it's interesting because it's the same story, but what's undercurrent, what's underneath it is very different. So the other one was repopulation of the earth. So in the Judeo-Christian version, you can trace a lot of people down to the lineage of Noah. But in the Greek version, I think they were more impatient, and they decided that to repopulate the earth, to just throw rocks over the head. The rocks that landed became babies. And that's how they repopulated the earth. Okay? The key thing was they were all forerunners of mankind. So what's the reasons for this? There's a school of thought that says, well, it must trace back to an actual common historical event. People read about the flood because the flood must have happened. There was even an archaeologist who decided that when they discovered settlements around the Black Sea that are underwater now, they hypothesized that there was a breach in the Mediterranean, the Mediterranean flooded the Black Sea, causing a deluge, and it is this flood that is remembered in these stories. There's another one which says that, well, maybe it didn't happen. Maybe this just reflects our time in the womb, because the womb is full of water. So our birth is a primeval way of celebrating the emergence from the flood. But if that's true, then how do you account for the differences in the story, right? In the Chinese flood myth, there is no boat, and it is the hero who subdues the flood, not a god. The Aztecs do have a flood story, but they don't even think there were even survivors. Humanity had to start again from zero. A new creation had to be built. Okay? Is there another reason? This is one possible reason, and that is storytelling, which is the story may have emerged from someplace, but it was carried over time, over continents, different cultures. And with each new retelling, a new layer has been added. It's interesting because you look at Sumer, the Fertile Crescent, and where the Judeo-Christian cultures are, they're quite close. But the further you go away, the more different the story becomes. It's a bit like your Chinese whispers. So I'll tell you a secret. You pass the secret on. By the time you get to the last person in the room, it's a very different story. Yeah? That's a possible explanation. Yeah? And if that's true, then what we see in the different stories in the world, again, is the fact that every person has inserted a bit of himself into a common story. Now, there's another, put this as a joke. So, but when Kennedy was shot, there were some people saying, hey, it's interesting. Huh? These two guys, Abraham Lincoln and John Kennedy, were both elected to the House of Representatives in 1946. 1846, 1946. Both were elected to presidencies, right? 1860, 1960. Both were civil rights figures. Yeah? Both were shot in the head on a Friday in the presence of their wives with another couple, with their male companion also being wounded. Wow. Very similar, right? Lincoln was shot in Ford's Theater. Kennedy was shot while riding a Ford limo. Right? Lincoln's assassin ran from the theater to a warehouse. Kennedy's assassin ran from the warehouse to a theater. Right? This is true, huh? This part is true. Both were succeeded by Southern Democrats named Johnson, Andrew Johnson, Lyndon Johnson. Both Johnsons were born in 1808, 1908. Both the Johnsons' mothers were named Hannah. And this one is the big joke. Before he was shot, Lincoln was in Monroe, Maryland. Before he was shot, maybe he was in Maryland Monroe. Okay, but I mean, it's interesting because these are random events. Now you can actually dig up and realize that the coincidences don't look that great. Okay, it's not. You can actually explain what looks like a coincidence, and you find that some of the information is not even real. But it's interesting because what's happening here was there was a conscious attempt to equate the two men. And both men happen to be some of the greatest leaders the Americans ever had. You know? And they both symbolize key points of society. So maybe this list here is an attempt to express a common bond, that we are all part of this march in history towards greater equality, justice, social justice. Both men are markers for that. What's happening here? The instant they die, each of them, they became myth. They stopped being real men because they have continued to live on in our subconscious. So, okay, last exercise. Oh, sorry. This question is what happened, okay? The question is what happened? 2 images. Can someone make a guess as to the sequence, which is first, which is next, and what happened?
Both are hung out to dry.
No, we are saying sequence of story.
Sequence.
So I'm saying the old man is possibly a coffee shop worker,
Yeah.
waiting to start the day or end of the day.
End of the day. So
No,
he's
by so
resting.
bright. By so bright.
I saw very second.
Yeah, I think we're waiting at the start.
Good. So he's waiting to start the work. Okay, good. Anybody else?
Way round.
That's the coffee thing, right? Long
Yeah.
ago they
The
did
salt.
the coffee.
Yeah.
The
For
salt.
making
Salt.
okay. So that means he had finished
Or
He
it
finished
means
it.
that he just
coffee business.
yeah, he's just finished or he went to the coffee shop, he drank, and then he decided to go to sleep.
Okay.
Basically, both are finishing. One old man finished. the other one.
Okay, this one. What happened?
Oh, my grandson.
Are they related? They're not related.
It's for you to create.
Yeah, but it don't seem like piece them together.
Huh?
This is a hard exercise because you have to make more of an effort now to think about how to connect them. Anybody make a guess? Tell me a story about these 3 images.
Firstly, and maybe that one is his house on the right hand side. So he put a barrier there so people cannot come in. Then after that he walked to the store. That's it. To buy something.
So an anti-social man goes to the store. You know?
He used to own that $2 shop. Then the evil children chased him out. And so he had a little stall there, clothes shop, so he went to walk and maybe pass the shop.
Very good.
This old man used to own a store, like he says, but his store was very small because after he closed down, he can close down the whole table. Then he walks along and finds another mall, and he stops at a hotline. Cannot go on anymore. How come like that?
Wow. Okay, very good. Real viral myths. Anybody else want to try? Okay, I'll go to the other one.
Frog. Frog with a coin.
This is like
in the
a
mouth.
jade frog sitting on
Oh, yeah.
a bunch of coins. He has a coin in his mouth.
Okay. The other one.
And this one is, from what I could make out, it was burnt ashes. So,
Burnt ashes, all this crap.
so what happened? What's the connection?
Praying for good fortune,
Praying for good
wealth,
fortune.
prosperity.
Anyone else? Take your leap.
Man's prayer wasn't answered.
His prayer was not answered.
Was answered.
Was it answered?
Because he bought a frog after that.
Very nice. Very good. One more theory. Anyone?
All wealth burns up.
All wealth burns up. So again, just as we were dealing with pattern recognition, we recognized it wasn't always a conscious skill set, and relationship is part of conscious and part of subconscious. The stories are grown as much as engineered, because what happened there? The story about the man whose shop was closed down and he goes and sees in the shop. right? It's an integrated way. What's happening now is in that exercise, the conscious mind intervenes more. Because you're now given more elements to assimilate, it isn't longer between one concept. It is actually saying, I'm developing the narrative now. And that was the story of a man who had, a past. He's maybe being overtaken by the world today, right? So, again, the element is see how your subconscious is marching together with your conscious now. The trigger, these were 3 random images. I actually had, the first time I ran that exercise, they had people come up with all kinds of weird explanations, and they were developing very interesting stories. But by that time, they were telling me, giving me all these ideas. I was saying, what's happening now? You guys have moved beyond your writer's block. You are now using your raw environment, and you're allowing what's inside you to inform what's in your mind. And you are now flowing. You've unchanneled it, because now you are cooperating. Both sides of your mind are working now together. Now, I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about myth. So everybody knows who this gentleman is. Everyone knows who this gentleman is. Well, this is the actual photo, right? This is the resulting artwork. What's happened here? They've both been transformed. Okay? And the interesting thing is, just like Lincoln and Kennedy, with time, when we are no longer with Mr. Lee, we will only have memories of him. And there will be an image carried in the press, in people who live outside the press, by people who live outside Singapore, people who live inside Singapore. Everyone will carry that myth of Mr. Lee. The same thing is happening now for Mr. Obama. This character is Paul Bunyan. He's a huge lumberjack. In American mythology, he's a giant who had a blue ox, a big blue ox. And there are many folklores or stories about this character. But the interesting thing is that because he's a giant, the original story was he was pretty tall. By the time you get to the end, he was a huge giant. And it's become a metaphor for the tall tale. So in one sense, as our stories evolve, they take on a greater and greater shape. What you've told me just now is one story. The interesting thing is that's going to happen is, when you tell me that story, I'm going to listen to it, and it's going to go in my mind. The interesting thing is you have developed it, it's a tree that's very unique to you, but because I'm appreciating it now, something else is happening. I am taking it and I'm recreating it. If I tell you the story, what's happening? You hear a stream of words, right? It is a stream of words which the writer has assembled using his imagination, but at the same time it needs to be understood. So the reader listens to the stream of words, he does the same thing. So exactly the same process is happening. When you read the story, there's recreation going on. So there is no such thing as a story being injected like some drug into another person's mind. There's that transmission process is never scientific or cold or direct. There is a recreation. And what happens then? Well, just like the Chinese whispers, what happens is by passing the story to another person, that story has changed. And it's a bit like evolution, right? Every time you retell a story, the retelling creates a new version. So it's like from one generation to the next. And every time that person in turn, the listener in turn, tells the same story again, something else has been added, a little bit of himself has been added. So it's a mutation, right? And sometimes what happens is you listen to 2 stories together, they may be talking about the same thing, and you try to put them together. So you're weaving the stories together to make sense of them, and there's a bit like crossbreeding, right? And then you can still scientifically step aside and say, oh, actually all these stories have little traces. They remind me of where it came from. What was the origin of that story? And the thing is, this happens whether or not you're conscious of it. No one sits down and say, I'm going to tell a story now, I'm going to reinvent it, and I trust that 10, 20 years from now, this will be still the same story. It will happen independently whether you want it or not. Sometimes I've talked to young writers who are very upset about that. They say, it's my story. You know, I wrote in such a way, it's so personal to me, how can I possibly, how can you tell me that I lost control of the story the moment I told it? But in truth, that's exactly what happened. It's both a conscious and subconscious event, just like evolution, right? But it's up to the reader, it's up to the person who's studying this process to ask himself a number of questions, right? What's different? Is it directed or purposive, or is it random? Sometimes in politics, the image that you're given will evolve. But it evolves in a political direction. People decide the story must mean this. Right? So, now, don't get me wrong, I love Singapore, right? Okay? But the story of our independence, right? It's very interesting. We say 1963, right? We were forced out on our own, and we decided that we would turn the page and we would build our country.
65.
I'm sorry, 65. Sorry, 65. I was reading a Wikipedia article about this same thing, and it said Singapore is the only country on whom its independence has been forced. That we had our independence forced upon us. Most people fight for the independence. We like they give it to us. I gotta do something, you know. And it's such a different concept because we look back now, we say we are glad we did it. You know, we are who we are today because we took on the challenge. There is maybe a perverse view saying, you had no choice, right? There's a political reason behind one view. One person is trying to belittle the country or making fun of it. The other one is actually trying to say, no, this was a worthy project. Singapore is a worthy project. That is a purposive or directed, right, way of developing the myth. So there will be people who will look at this picture of Mr. Lee, the paintings, the drawings, and there will be a direction that is going. And that process will continue whether you like it or not. And there will be people who are derisive of Mr. Lee, maybe, right? And you will see this strain separate over time. As time marches on, and Mr. Lee passes on, as we all do, there will be this debate that goes on after it is gone. And we'll know less and less about the real Mr. Lee, as we will know less and less about the real Paul Bunyan, or the real Barack Obama. Right? So the question then is, won't everything sound the same, right? If I'm telling the same story over and over again, trust to that process. No story will ever really be identical. It can be political, just like the concept of conscious reconstruction of a myth for a political purpose. And the examples are here. So the Nazis, for example, had this fantasy about a master race, and they tried to put all the histories in line with that concept. Didn't quite work. Then there is the evangelical or other element to it. They said, well, I'm telling you the story again, but I want you to listen to me now because I'm telling you something else. The story behind the story, right? And early Christians did this quite a bit. And they would go to a pagan society, they would listen to a story, like the story of Odin being hung on the world ash tree. They said, hey, that sounds a lot like Jesus being crucified. So I want to share my faith with them. I will say, the parallels? So I adopt the story. And they even try and they morph the story a little bit to show the similarities. And you see in other parts of the world, that this is going on. The syncretism does go on. And some of it is molded by environment which is subconscious. Right? Now, this is a commercial break, right? $20, right? But I actually explored this idea in my book. And in Faith and Lies, I wrote a story called Shannon and the President's Double Check. What it was about was fan fiction. The story is about a writer who writes a story about a character. he finds that this one character in the story, a random character he inserted, was so interesting that he finished the story with that character being the central character, a lady called Shannon. And he liked the character so much, he kept writing more and more stories. The interesting thing was that people liked that character too. And they lapped up their stories, he became successful with it. Then at some point he decided that as a writer he had to try something else. So he stopped, he moved on from that character. So in this story what happens is he gives up writing about her. What he doesn't realize is that while he's given up writing about her, fans have continued to write stories about this Shannon character. So we catch up with him about maybe a few years later or 10 years later, and he comes to a convention where all these fans have gotten together, and they're all celebrating stories, many of which he didn't write. And it's about this fictional person who did not exist, Shannon. And the story is about how he looks at the character, he thinks it's just like an old friend, and they haven't seen each other for a long time, he's just catching up. Okay? And I pushed it a little further in the Coffin That Wouldn't Bury because this one is about, Shannon appears in this story as well, but it's about a character who realizes that he's being written into a book and he wants to escape. But both were for one purpose, to describe this concept that your story, once released into the world, escapes your grasp and takes on a life of its own. You know, it will have a progeny of its own, and it will add to the human race's narrative. Some people feel that if you think about it this way, you relieve yourself of the responsibility of whether the story succeeds or fails. Because you suddenly realize that you're part of something larger than just yourself. And you're prepared to trust in things which are not so. I mean, if you feel that you're always responsible for your own failures, the weight of it keeps you from continuing executing something, right? But if you realize that actually whatever you do is part of a larger purpose, it changes things. It gives you faith. So what is your faith? That you have a part in myth making. This is one of my favorite films. My father introduced it to me when I was young. And I love the story so much. I went to find the book, Seven Pillars of Wisdom. Lawrence Arabia is the, for those of the, Lawrence Arabia was a T.E. Lawrence, he was a British officer who, in World War I, assisted the Arabs to overthrow Turkish rule, part of the Arab revolt. And it's because of him that there's this concept of a rebel leader. It became a motif of its own, a meme of its own in the 20th century. But he was an outsider all his life. He wasn't accepted by the British. He wasn't accepted by the Arabs. But but his myth became larger than life, right? And in the early parts and the middle parts of the 20th century, there was a lot of books written about him, and the movie itself became a big success. His star has waned somewhat. People don't really read about him very much nowadays. But for his time, he was a real myth. It had grown quite a bit. And the interesting thing was that nowadays, all academic study is about who the real Lawrence is. Right? Everybody's trying to say, okay, I know the story, book, we've heard about all the critical writings. Can we really find the real person? And I like this poster because you can't see his eyes. You don't really know who he is. He's shrouded in shadow, right? This other character is another interesting. I have many students or people I have come across who say to me, "Oh, that's Frankenstein," right? But we know this is not Frankenstein. This is Frankenstein's monster. Frankenstein is the name of his creator, right? What's happened? He's suddenly subsumed the writer's identity. I mean, the creator's identity, right? And the thing is, the stories in both cases have escaped their origins. And every time you tell the story, you add to that process. You are giving it another kick for the ball to go along. Okay? So what has this got to do with myth with your writing? Well, what I sometimes do is, if I'm stuck for an idea, my personal approach is to step back and say, well, I'm going to dig into the treasure trove of stories, old stories, embarrassingly old stories maybe, and tell myself, how can I do something with it? I use it because I trust to my imagination. I know that when I'm telling the story again, when I'm digging deep, it will be unique. It would have been the original root, but it would be unique. There is a lot of treasure to be found out there. It's buried in many stories all over the world. And sometimes the process of writing isn't creating something new. It is building something new out of something old, something that exists. Okay? So, how do I use what I've been told? Well, if you're a writer, things that you want to think about are to let go and then go anywhere. Right? Too many writers get, when the writer's block intensifies because they cannot escape their immediate deadlines, what they were thinking they were trying to achieve. Stop telling yourself that if you succeed or fail, it's all on you. Right? Accept your part. It's a small but important part. But it is small. Because once you tell your story, the story has a life of its own. Okay? Recognize also that you may be an individual, but in one real sense, you are everyone else in society. Just as everyone else can be symbolized with you. You are us, we are you. And everyone wants to know about themselves. So you have something worthy to tell. Because when you tell us about your life, people will draw connections and they will feel that that was something real. Okay? The other thing was to let chance guide you. Because sometimes the best way to explore is to just get up and go and not think about where you're going. And I always say, when it comes to writing, you want to build the story, think later, do first. So I guess this is a good time to stop and to ask if you guys have any questions for me. Or you want to share anything about how you've come across this process or how it's helped you in some way or other. Yes?
It's interesting how you use the Freudian concept of the subconscious to explain your ideas. So could you elaborate more on what inspiration or what you gain from Freud's ideas that as you develop your own theory?
For me, the person I had I learned most from was not Freud, but from Jung. He helped me systematize or express in a systematic and logical way many things that I think most of us instinctively sense but don't understand. So psychology gives us a big boost because it gives us a vocabulary, it gives us a way of thinking about things. And when you think about all the things that happen in life, you talk to people, you see events happen, you can actually understand it from that perspective. And it tells you a little bit more, there's more beneath the surface. When you apply to your own writing, you discover then that those processes are very real. I'll share with you an experience. Many years ago, before I met my wife, I was in a very unhappy relationship. And I separated, I said time to move on. I'm glad I did. But at the time I was moving in between relationships, I wrote this curious story. I didn't understand why I wrote it. The story was about a man who lives, he's like a homeless guy. He lives in a park, but he has in his bag a pristine set of clothes, which he carefully tends and he keeps pristine. What he does is he crashes weddings. So while the wedding dinner is going on, right, he will suddenly appear, right, and he will sit down at one of the tables. Usually at the end of weddings there'll be some table where the person you never invited or who comes late or RSVP late or doesn't really nobody else shows up. Well, he hung around those tables. So everybody think, oh, I don't know, he must be the groom's side. The bride people say, oh, maybe he's the bride's side. So he manages to get away with that. And the story is about how there's this lady who goes for many weddings. She has many friends getting married, except her. And she curiously sees the same character again and again and again. And she's thinking, who's this guy? Nobody I know seems to know, I would know the groom or the bride, and they don't seem to know who he is. So she realizes that he's like a serial wedding guest, And so she's determined to find out what's what's behind the story. And the creepy thing is that when she does chat, he has this very clipped way of saying this marriage won't last, or this marriage will be good, whatever. And oddly enough, he's right. So the end of the story is she decides to get married herself, right? And on her wedding day, she sees the guy. So she has to figure out, oh, what do I want to know? And then when she talks to him, she finally discovers his story. And his story is a very simple one, nothing sinister. He was married when his wife died. When he married, it was the happiest day of his life. Because he's lost his wife, he goes to various weddings to relive that joy vicariously. But because he's gone to so many weddings, he can sense the vibes of the two persons getting married. So he's able to predict, extrapolate. And so asking him that question, how will I do? Right? And I don't answer that question. But the thing about that story was like, I don't write stories like this. Why did I suddenly do something like that? I couldn't understand it. And then I decided, why don't I apply this Jungian concept of, there's symbols and there's a language to it. And I deconstructed the story. And I realized that the story is an expression of how I was at the time. There was a lot of uncertainty between relationships. I questioned the purpose or the value of the marriage, whether it's something for me. I was anxious to know if I had a future of that nature. And I remembered the joy of being in a good relationship, which was sadly distant at the time. But interesting thing was, I realized this story is coming from a different angle. I've never written anything like that. And I realized that that's exactly that process I tapped into. And so sometimes now, when I feel upset, and I don't know what's bugging me, I do make an effort to write. Because I realize the words I use, the story I choose to settle on, will tell me something. I may not see it now. I may give it a month, come back to it. And I realize it's a journal of what I've gone through. Now another reader is gonna get it, read it, won't see the story behind it, but they'll enjoy it. And they'll, of course, imbue it themselves. So I think that experience basically sort of validated